So this will be the third of the introductory sessions of the second section of the Sefer Yetzirah, and then from next week, Rez Hashem will hopefully start to look at more details, depending on where we get to today. So I wanted to start with just kind of going over the text and then looking at those Mishnayot, 6 Mishnayot from the second section, which will complete the first chapter of the Gra version. And then we'll kind of go back and compare it to what we've been looking at in the Rambam, in Abulafia, and in Yechezkel. So let me just share the screen then before that. One sec. Okay, just going to share that screen. Right, so going back to this one here, this is the second section. So we've been looking at first section, which is the first 8 Mishnayot of the first chapter. Second section begins by looking at, so the second section completes, is what I'm calling the second section, and it's the continuation of the first chapter to the end of it. I'm just going to enlarge the screen here so we can see a bit better. Right. So let me just see here. Move this out of the way. There we go. Okay. So right. So this is the reason why I've separated it into as a second section is because up until now we've seen the divisions of the Sfirot. Well, we haven't seen any division of the Sfirot. The whole of the first chapter up until here has been speaking about the Sfirot as a whole. So every Mishnah has been speaking about the entirety of all the Sfirot, more or less. And actually, this is how this particular section also begins. It starts Eser Sfirot B'lima. So this is the last of the Mishnah where it talks about Eser Sfirot. But then it carries on Achat. It starts counting them out, 1. And the second, the 10th Mishnah of the first chapter again starts talking about the second Sfirah, Shtaim, and then Shalosh, and then Arba. And then the 13th Mishnah speaks about the 5th to the 9th, to the 5th to the 10th. The 5th to the 10th, yeah. So the final 6 of the Sfirot, and then there is a general Kollel right at the end of all of them. So let's read it without going into too deep of analysis, just to get a sense of what's written here. Now, granted, that's the reason why I brought this format here, so we can see the whole thing right in front of us as one. So the first of the second section, Eser Sfirot B'lima. I haven't translated it. I haven't put an English translation of it actually, but hopefully we won't need it at this point. I'll just translate it for you. Eser Sfirot B'lima, Achat Ruach Elokim Chayim, Baruch U'Barach Shemo, Shelcha Olamim, Kol Ve'Ruach V'Dibur, V'Hu Ruach HaKodesh. So translated, 10 Sfirot B'lima, so ineffable Sfirot, Sfirot of nothingness, Sfirot B'lima, without Mahut, substance. Achat, 1, is Ruach Elokim Chayim, the breath of the living God. Baruch U'Barach Shemo, blessed be, and blessed is the name Shel Chai Olamim, the name of the life of the worlds, of the universes. Kol Ve'Ruach V'Dibur, it is a voice, a breath, and speech. Or without the definite article, voice, breath, and speech. Ruach HaKodesh, and this is Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, Divine Spirit. So I'm not going to go into the details of it, but we can see this is talking about the first Sfirah it's referring to it as the breath of the living God, or the spirit of the living God, Ruach Elokim Chaim, which is Kol Veruach V'Dibur, and it is Ruach HaKodesh, so the Holy Spirit. Shtaim, next one. Shtaim Ruach Miruach Chakak V'Chatzav Ba 22 אותיות יסוד, 3 אימות ו7 כפולות ו12 פשוטות ברוח אחת מהן. So the second of the Sfirot is Ruach Miruach. Shtaim is Ruach Miruach, breath from breath, a secondary breath. And then it introduces a term which we'll see coming throughout the rest of this Sefer Yetzirah, Chakak V'Chatzav, and I've underlined it for a reason, and we'll go into that in a minute. Engraved, also again, so like this Ari Kaplan in his commentary on Sefer Yetzirah says that the Sefer Yetzirah can be read in the third person past, says, and it was done. So Chakak V'Chatzav would translate as he engraved and he carved, but it also can be translated in the second person. What's the word? Imperative. The right word for it, as in it can be issued as a command, chakak b'chatzav, as in engrave and carve, and that's how he translates it, I believe. Engrave and carve, or he engraved and he carved with this secondary breath, ruach miruach. 22 letters of foundation. And this is the first introduction of the letters outside of what we saw as the Brit Mechuban Be'emtza in the first section, the covenant of the tongue, and the withholding your mouth from speaking. This is the first mention of speech, and specifically as the 22 letters of speech. So this is so he says, engrave and carve with this ruach miruach, breath from breath, 22 letters of foundation, shalosh, and then these 22 letters divide into shalosh imot, 3 mothers, sheva kfulot, 7 doubled letters, 12 pshutot, and 12 simple letters, and ruach achat mehem, but there is a singular breath for all of them, for them, ruach achat mehem. Okay, so all these things have significance. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we're going to go in and analyze them later on. I want to just get a sense of what's there, and then we're going to go back and compare it to the Rambam and to Yechezkel. So shalosh, so it's number 3. Shalosh, number 3. Shalosh, mayim miruach chakak v'chatzav bahen kaf bet otiyot mitohu vavohu refes vetit chakakan kemin aroga chatzevan kemin choma sivevan. So there are 2 ways of, there are multiple girsaot here. The Gra edition says sivevan, but the other editions say sichechan. I'll tell you the difference in a minute. So sivevan kemin ma'aziva ve'atzak alehem sheleg v'na'asa afar shene'emar, and there's a quote, ki la'sheleg yomar heve aretz. So to translate it, number 3, mayim miruach. Third one is water from breath. Again, chakak v'chatzav, engrave and carve bahen 22 kaf bet otiyot mitohu vavohu refes vetit, 22 letters from tohu vavohu, emptiness and void, or whatever the translation is. That's what they normally translate it. Refes vetit, mire and clay. Chakakan kemin aruga, they are engraved. He engraved them like a bed, like a vegetable bed, a garden bed. Chatzevan kemin choma, they are carved as a wall. Sivevan kemin ma'aziva, they are surrounded, enclosed. That's why the previous one says sichachan, or the other version says sichachan, which means covered, like schach. Kemin ma'aziva, like a ceiling. V'atzak alehem sheleg, and he poured upon them snow v'na'asa afar, and this became dust. Shne'emar ki la'sheleg yomar heve aretz, because it is said in a pasuk. I think it's must be Tehillim somewhere. For to the snow he said, become earth. That is the third of them. Arba, to the fourth one. Arba, Esh Mimayim Chakak V'Chatzav Ba Kiseh Kavod B'Serafim B'Ofanim B'Chayot HaKodesh Malachei HaSharet Shlostan Yesad Me'ono Shemer Oseh Melacha B'Ruchot B'Shartav Esh Lohet. So to translate that. Number 4, Arba, Esh Mimayim, fire from water. Chakak V'Chatzav, he engraved and he carved Ba, with the fire from water. Kiseh Kavod, the throne of glory. Seraphim, the fire angels. Ofanim, the wheel angels. B'Chayot HaKodesh, and the holy living angels. Malachei HaSharet, and the ministering angels. Mishloshtan, and from these three, we'll see what these three are referring to. Mishloshtan Yasad Me'ono, from these three he established his throne, or not his throne, his abode. Shneimar, as it said, Oseh Melacha B'Ruchot, he makes from his angels, or he makes the wind his angels. Mishartav Esh Lohet, his messengers, flaming fire. Okay, that's number 4. That's the fourth of the Sefirot that it's referring to. Now we have the next 6. So next mission number 13. בירך 3 אותיות מן הפשוטות בסוד 3 אמות א' מ' ש' וקבעם בשמו הגדול וחתם בהם 6 כצוות. 5 חתם רום ופנה למעלה וחתמו בי' ו' ה' ו'. 6 חתם תחת ופנה למטה וחתמו בה' י' ו'. 7 חתם מזרח ופנה לפניו וחתמו בו' י' ה'. 8 חתם מערב ופנה לאחריו וחתמו בו' ה' י'. 9 חתם דרום ופנה לימינו וחתמו בי' ו' ה'. 10 חתם צפון ופנה לשמאלו וחתמו בה' ו' י'. So a long one. בירא 3 אותיות. He selected. This is the same as the melacha of borer on Shabbat. He separated, and actually berur is technical term in the Ari, and also in Chassidut, specifically of Ishbitzer Adzin, which will possibly be relevant when we look at this particular mission in a few weeks' time. So he selected 3 letters, min hapshutot, from the simple letters. So we saw in mission number, this one here, mission number 10, that the Sefirah, also in the previous section, that the 22 letters of foundation separated into 3 mothers, 7 doubled, and 12 simple letters. So God, or the Ein Sof, separated, isolated 3 letters from amongst the 12 simple letters, besod 3 imot, in the mystery of the 3 mothers. So these are the 3 mothers. And these 3 mothers are Aleph, Mem, and Shin. Those are the 3 mothers. And these 3 simple letters, Kava'am B'Shmo, he established them, he planted them within his holy, his Shem HaGadol, his great name. V'chat'am bahem 6 ketzavot, and he signed with these letters, he signed or sealed the 6 directions of the universe. And so that, remember, we saw 6 directions in the previous section. So these are 6 directions of the universe: up, down, left, right, forwards and backwards. Those are 6 of the directions. And we saw in the previous section when it talks about the 10 Sefirot, it adds to that future, past and future, and then good and evil. So here are the 6 directions. It's the same principle there, but now we've added another dimension or another element that upon these directions, these 6 extremities, in the previous section it talks about them as omkim, depths. So these 6, he says ketzavot, the extremities. These have been signed with these letters of Hashem's name, which we'll see as Yud Hey Vav, these 3 letters. So now he defines them and lists them out. So he says Chamesh, 5, Chatam Rom Fana Lamala. He inscribed, he sealed, signed above, and he Pana Lamala, and he looked above, and he directed himself above. Chatamo Yud Hey Vav, and he sealed it with Yud Hey Vav. Now you'll see how the Gra assigns the directions, the different. So what we'll find here actually is see the different permutations of letters Yud Hey Vav. So any 3-letter word in Hebrew or in any language, there are 6 possible combinations or 6 possible permutations of these 3 letters. So there are 6 ways of putting these letters in an order. So Yud Hey Vav, Yud Vav Hey, Hey Vav Yud, Hey Yud Vav, Vav Yud Hey, Vav Hey Yud. These are the 6 ways of putting these 3 letters together in unique ways. And so this is going to be one of the principal meditations from within the Sefer Yetzirah in this next section, not in this particular section. So these 6 permutations will link up to the 6 extremity, the 6 ketzavot. So we'll see again, the Gra assigned this particular order, these particular permutations in these particular directions. The other versions, they have different ways of assigning these dimensions, and again, they do for different reasons. So we'll see later on how the Gra does it, the Gra version, and we'll see how that will be relevant to us in our particular practice in this meditative take upon these different ideas here. Right, so above corresponds to Yud Hey Vav. Number 6, Shesh, Chatam Tachad Ufana Lemata Vechatmo He Yud Vav. So number 6, he sealed below, and he faced down, and he sealed it with Hey Yud Vav. Now, just as I'll mention it again, but you'll see these directions for these directions, permutations for each direction according to the Gra, revolve around Vav as a meter, or as that's the establishing point. So in the up-down direction, the Vav is in the 3rd position. So you'll see the first one is Yud Hey Vav, the second one is Hey Vav Yud. So above is Yud Hey Vav, and beneath is Hey Yud Vav. And the reason why is because the above corresponds to Chesed. No, sorry. Above corresponds to Netzach. Beneath corresponds to what's it called? To Hod. So and with the other ones as well. So Chesed is on the right, Gevurah is on the left, Tiferet is in front, and Yesod is at the back. And these pairings correspond to again the Chassidim and the Gevurot, the general principles of Chochmah, Bina, Chesed, and Gevurah. So we'll see that Netzach is a right-hand aspect, right column aspect. Hod is a left column aspect, and the right column aspect has the ordering of the letters of Yud Hey Vav Hey as Yud and Hey. That's how it always works. So Netzach is going to be Yud Hey. You'll see that Chesed will have the Yud before the Hey, and Tiferet will have Yud before the Hey also. And this has ramifications for how we're going to view this whole section here. But in this particular dimension of up and down, this up and down dimension, the Vav is on the left-hand side, in the left-hand column, and the Yud and the Hey, they invert. Above being the positive aspect, the masculine aspect begins Yud and Hey. The beneath is feminine, that will be Hey and Yud. The kind of what's it called? This is in terms of thinking about it in terms of a voltage. positive and negative, not rather than good and evil in that sense. So then we have number 7, Sheva. Chatam Mizrach ufana lefanav v'chatamo bevav yud hey. Number 7, he sealed east. So look how we have two ideas. We have he sealed east and then he faced forwards. So facing east is a forward facing idea. So he then chatamo bevav yud hey. So I said beforehand that the yud and the hey in that order indicates the chasadim, and in this case. And the vav corresponds to dimensionality. So in the case of the up and down, the vav is in the left-hand column. In the case of forwards and backwards, east and west, the vav is on the first column. And we'll see that in the case of right and left, which is north and south, the vav is in the middle of them. So because we're talking about Tiferet, which is before, which is east, which is the Chasadim, we'll see that the Yud and the Hey fall in that particular order. The Yud comes first, and the Vav comes second. Then the Hey comes second. So it's Vav Yud Hey. Shmone Chatam Ma'arav Fana Lecharav Chatamo Vav Hey Yud. So number 8, he sealed west, and he turned backwards. He turned around, faced backwards, and he sealed it with a Vav Hey Yud. So we have the Vav in the first column, and then the Hey Yud invert. And that's how it works. And we'll see an interesting kind of. You can even. I'm thinking about it now geopolitically, and thinking how the relevance and the connections between what these things mean. So we'll see, and we'll this. Hopefully, we'll talk about it in a minute. So we'll see how there's a possibility that this has ramifications for geopolitics, or at least cultural emphases. Which you'll tell me if you think that is relevant or not. Okay, so let's carry on. Tesha chatam darom fana lama lemino v'chatamo b'yud vav hey. 10 chatam tzafon v'fana l'smolo v'chatamo b'hei vav yud. So number 9, he sealed south, and he faced the right, and he sealed it with yud vav hey. So the Vav is in the middle, the Yud is, because we're talking about the south in the Kabbalah and in Judaism in general, and the right-hand side. So you imagine yourself you're standing facing east with your back to the west, and your right-hand side, your right hand is southward facing, your left-hand side is north facing, and your head is above and your feet are below. That is kind of how we're looking at things. So the right-hand side will be a chasadim element, which is, therefore we have yud before the hey, with a vav in the middle, because we're talking about that dimension. And then eser chatam safon, he seals the north, and he faces his left-hand side. V'chatmo be hey vav yud. And he seals it with Hey, Vav, and then Yud. Okay, those are the 6 directions. And that's exactly what we see in the number 14, in mission number 14. Elu, Eser Sfirot B'lima, Achat Ruach Elokim Chaim, Beruach, and then Shtaim, it doesn't say, but then Ruach Miruach, Mayim Miruach, Esh Mimayim, Rom Tachal Mizrach Ma'arav Tzafon V'Darom. These are the 10 Sfirot. These are the 10 Sfirot B'lima, says there. Number 1 is Ruach Elokim Chaim, the spirit, the breath of the living God. Then we have breath from breath, water from breath, fire from water, up, down, east, west, north, and south. So interesting in the previous Mishnah, he says south, and then he says north, but in this section he says north first, which I'm not entirely sure why. Okay, right, so that is this section. It's pretty short and pretty obscure. But let's now go back, see what we've done. We spent some more time on mission number 13, but we're going to see how that's relevant. So going back to what we saw with Rambam, and also what we saw with, even let's go even further back to the Beit Yaakov, and what we saw with the Hakdamala Beit Yaakov from his son, and from Rav Tzadok, who was the contemporary of both of them, actually. So this whole section, or what we've been speaking about, the way we've been speaking about, is all about the prophetic experience, about coming to an experience of God in His absolute unity. So according to the Rav Tzadok, we saw that Ma'aseh Merkava was about perceiving God through His absolute unity, which is transcendent of self and transcendent of language as well, inability to speak it. Again, so what we have here is language. We have speech. We have letters, which construct a form of language. The first Mishnah talks about language, talks about speech. But nevertheless, we are still talking about this prophetic process, and that's kind of why I've highlighted Chakak v'Chatzav. So I don't know where I saw it, whether I just kind of calculated it myself. But the gematria, I've been working on gematrias quite a lot recently with this. The gematria of Chakak v'Chatzav is the same as Vashov. So we saw how in the previous section we've been speaking about Ratzu Vashov, running and returning. Running means running to speech, like we saw in let's look at it. Yeah, like we saw in Mishnah number 8, in Rat Picha Leber, Shuv Lamakom, return to the place. So, and we saw how the Chayot are Ratzu Vashov, and this is from Ezekiel's vision, the Chayot are Ratzu Vashov, and the Chashmal is Ratzu Vashov. So we see that Ratzu is Ratzu Daber, and Rat Picha Ledaber, if your mouth wants to speak, Shuv Lamakom, and Shuv Lamakom is returning to before speech, returning to the silence. So this is what we have here. Chakak v'Chatzav is an aspect of returning, an aspect of Vashov, of going behind before speech. And that's why, and that's kind of, and this is the same, the idea that we had from that was the idea of Ishtadluta that Radzina speaks about, and he brings the Zohar, of Ishtadluta deoraita. One second, I just need to close this. This was the Ishtadluta deoraita. The Zohar talks about it. There is a service, the work, the effort, the striving of Torah, which it then says is Ishtadluta de Guchabrikul Mindale, the striving of the Holy Blessed One to know Him. That is the principle of it. And we saw in the Radzin how he understood it to mean the process of refraining from doing anything. So he says this is easy. It is. The Zohar says it is free. It doesn't require any effort. The Radzina says all you need is the sur mirah, refraining from evil. And he says that what happens is you can come to hear the voice of creation, which is the 10 Sfirot, which is the Asra Ma'amrot, and which is also the Aseret Diberot. You can come to hear the sound of creation, the sound of which is the same sound as the speeches of the 10 Commandments, through the purification of your consciousness and through the silencing of your and the stilling of your sensory perception, sensory desires, the distractions of this world. And again, this is what we've been speaking about with the Rambam. Prophetic experience is that which comes after the silencing or the control over these different aspects. So the purification of your intellect, your imagination, and the overcoming of your hergesh, like we saw in Abulafia, how we understood it, but how the Rambam speaks about moral riding upon your morals, like overcoming your natural tendencies. This is the Ishtaluta, the Kuchabrichol Mindale, the striving of the Holy Blessed One to know Him, to come to know Him again. So this is why this is the same principle. So that's why we have Chakak v'Chatzav. We saw that this is the same. Well, in the terms of Yeshev Badad V'Yidom Ki Natal Alav. This is the pasuk we saw, which is the gematria of HaTorah, the Torah. So Ishtadut Da'oraita, same idea, HaTorah. So Torah itself is Ratzu V'Shav. HaTorah is the gematria of the pasuk in Sefer Echa. Yeshev Badad V'Yidom Ki Natal Alav. Let him sit alone and be silent, because God has placed this upon him. God has given this to you. And we saw how Chazal in Pirkei Avot translate this principle, this translate Yeshev Badad V'Yidom as the sitting and learning Torah, because it's in the same list of how do we know that somebody who sits and learns Torah receives schar, because it says Yeshev Badad V'Yidom Ki Natal Alav. He acquires notel schar, he acquires merit from sitting alone and being silent. So Yeshev Badam, so again we have this idea of Yeshuv, of Shuv Lamakom, returning, Sur Merah. Yeshev Badad is this idea of being by yourself, V'Yidom, and become silent. And that is the merit. So there's the same ideas here, and that's what we see again repeated 3 times. Chakak v'chatzav, chakak v'chatzav, chakak v'chatzav, and then we have again here chakikan chatzevam. This is important because these principles again come in Abulafia and other of the ecstatic Kabbalists as being central ideas for the meditative practice from within the ecstatic Kabbalah, which is called the Kabbalah Nevu'it. Same principle. We're going back to come to an understanding, an experience of godliness. So again, that really kind of frames this idea of what is it that we're that how now that we've understood that this idea of chakak v'chatzav and these principles of the Sfirot are about coming to this experience of returning to Torah, returning to come to know God. We can look at this as ways of returning through, almost like taking a speech and returning through that speech to God. Right, so even though the Ratzu is Ratzu Ledaber, but again, like I've seen, like I mentioned this not in this series, in a different series, that for the Kabbalists, for the ecstatic Kabbalists, we come to an prophetic experience, to an experience of divinity, of the divine silence through speech. So we take the speech and we return that speech to silence. That's why there's Ratzu V'Shov. The whole thing of Torah, which is also Ishtadut D'Oraita, the running and returning. So we run and then we return. We run and return. That is the covenant that is forged upon it. But there is the running leads us to a returning as well. Again, the next section we'll speak about the other aspect of it, which is Ishtadut de Mitzvata, Ishtadut de Kuchabrichol, de Kana Ba'avada. This is a different mode of divine worship, different way of doing, which is expensive, which is requires, the Zohar says there requires a full payment there. But that's a different aspect of it. Here we're still, that is the aspect of the mystery of Maaseh Bereshit, the mystery of Yichud Tata, the lower unity, which is manifesting God in the physical world, manifesting God through our actions, the Kaima Ba'avada, that is established through an action. This is what we're doing here, is a upward turning, returning to God, which is the ecstatic Maaseh Merkavah, the prophetic experience, the upper waters and the returning, the upper unity, Yichuda Ilah, upper unity, which returns us to that place of oneness. So again, for me, this frames it. That's what we're still talking about Sfirot. The Sfirot are in Olam Atzilut, which is even though it's part of Maaseh Bereshit, it's still the place of Afisat HaMachshavah. We saw this is the nullification of consciousness. So even though we're speaking about speech, and we'll see how, and even in the first section we spoke about speech, and we spoke about the dimensionality of the Sfirot. Even though they're all one here, now they're separated, but there's still a sense of there's still Sfirot, and so therefore we're still going to be using them, or they're still part of the ultimate unity of God. So that's this section of the Sefer Yetzirah. So we've been speaking about how prophecy manifests in the Rambam and in Abulafia. And we saw that within the Rambam, prophecy is dependent on 3 qualifications. Those qualifications are the perfection of the intellectual faculty, the perfection of the imaginative faculty, and the perfection of the moral faculty. In Abulafia, even in Rambam also, it's called sechel, intellect, dimyon, imagination, and Abulafia talks about it as hergesh, which is literally feeling. But it comes to that hergesh with Abulafia comes to incorporate all these aspects of sensory stimulation, sensory feeling. Again, like we saw in the Bet Yaakov, of those distractions of the universe, of this world, the physicality. And we'll see how that manifests. Hopefully, if we have time, we'll look through that a bit as well today. If not, then we can leave that till next week. This qualification of sechel and dimyon. So we saw sechel last week was the faculty which is able to distinguish between truth and falsehood. The imagination that we saw in the Rambam in the previous session was, he said, primarily the faculty which is able to, which one of the primary functions of the imagination was the retention of sensory experience, memory. One of the primary functions of dimyon is memory. So the sfirot, which we haven't really spoken about, but the sfirot correspond to these different aspects of humanity. So we have here it's just talking about, it talks about it in terms of fire and water and air and directions. But elsewhere, the Kabbalah, the Sefer Bahir probably, talks about it. We have different names for the Sefirot, and these names are known about. You can go and look them up and read up about them. So this is not, let's say, the location to go into explanations of them. They're accessible, but to name them, Keter, the first one, crown, Chochma, Bina, Chesed, Gevur, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod Yesod, and Malchut. Keter is the crown, the highest one, number 1. Chochma, wisdom and understanding, kindness and strength, beauty, eternity, splendor, foundation, and Malchut, kingship. So these 10 Sfirot can come to correspond to different aspects of our experience. We've spoken about that already. Malchut corresponds to the physical, the Lama'asiyah, the physical world. The 6 Sfirot from Chesed to Yesod correspond to Zer Anpin, which is one of the parts of human Ari, and that corresponds to Olam Yetzirah, because they function as unity. They correspond to these 6 Sfirot of the directions here. And it corresponds to feeling. This Chesed to Yesod are the feeling, emotional aspects of the human being. So Malchut will be the body. Chesed, Gevur, Tiferet are the emotional aspects, the feelings. You can see this in a good place to look over this is in Ginsburg. What you need to know about Kabbalah. I'll show you the book 1 second. This is Rav Ginsburg's What You Need to Know About Kabbalah, and it's going to be legible in the smaller box here. This is Rav Ginsburg. So this is a good kind of way of introduction to Kabbalah. Obviously, you have other books about it. I think Dov Pinson has some of the ones, or the other books in it from Chassidut. Ari Kaplan talks about it in a space. It's a good place to look. So here he talks about, there's a section where he lists the different aspects of the Sfirot. It's actually page number 96 here. In fact, let me just stop sharing the screen. I can show you the bigger picture. So you can see here, but focus now. Right. So you can see there. No, I can't read it properly. There's cognitive, emotive, and what was I saying? Pragmatic behavioral sfirot. So, like I said, the sfirot from Chesed to Yesod correspond to the emotional and the inner kind of world, the midot. Really? So, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet are emotional sfirot. So, love and fear, or love and fear, it manifests like that. Anger as well, in a negative sense. Gevurah corresponds to lust and anger. We'll see how that manifests. Actually, we'll see it soon enough. And then Ches, Netzachot, and Yesod correspond to the behavioral kind of. These are kind of instinctual, social aspects of our being. Malchut is the body, and Chochma Bina, and Dat, which comes when Keter is not functioning or not or hidden. Dat comes in its place, like we saw. Dat Keter is Dat Elyon, so it's reflected as Dat. So Chochma, Bina, and Dat are the mind, mochin, the mind faculties, the brains, or the mind states. Let me go back into that. This point in the Sefer Yetzirah. So these aspects of the Sfirot are here in this section here. We have Chochma again, like we saw as intellectual, but Chochma in a different format corresponds to Atzilut, which is Afisat HaMachshava. So it's non-thinking, it's beyond thinking, or it's non-verbal thinking. Bina would be therefore verbal thinking, or not necessarily verbal thinking, but discriminative thinking, discriminative awareness. Bina is lavchin ben davar davar. So I have it. I got it. Wrote it down. So in the Midrash Rabbah, Midrash Rabbah Mishlei, on the commenting on the second verse of Mishnah, where it says lahavin imre bina, to understand words of bina. So the commentary there, the midrash there, it says shetzarich adam shehiyeh biado bina, that a person it should have in his hand understanding. And what is understanding? Understanding is lahavin davar, we talked about that, to understand one thing from within another thing. So bina is the faculty which is able to distinguish between one thing and another thing. Again, it's almost like an objectified thing. Davar is a word. Davar is a thing also. An objective sense of being able to discriminate between this object and that object. And then you have Keter above it, which is outside of even Afisat HaMachshava. It's outside of that. It's beyond even that. But let's look at it here now. So it's interesting to try and understand what it actually is referring to here. I'm going to follow the Gra's understanding of it because it makes sense. Even though when I originally looked at it and how the Ari Kaplan talks about it, he sees the first Mishnah, which is Ruach Elokim Chaim, the breath of the living God, as referring to Keter. Because it makes sense, because you have the first one is Keter, the second one is Ruach Miruach, breath from breath, and we saw how the directions, how there's six Omkim, the six depths in the previous section, how they place Keter and Malchut on these pair of opposites. So you have so therefore it makes sense that Ruach is Keter, Ruach Miruach is Malchut, and then you have Maim is Chochma, Esh is Bina, and the other 6 are the 6 Sfirot from Chesed to Yesod. But the Gra sees it differently. He actually sees the first Mishnah, the first Ruach Elokim Chaim, not as Keter, and not even as Malchut. He sees that Malchut is actually being replaced here. So he says Malchut is not here in its normal form. Malchut is being replaced by Atik Yamin. Now Atik Yamin, okay, this requires a bit of a prelude. So in the Zohar and the Idra Zuta and Idra Rabbah, there is discussion of what is referred to as Atika Kadisha, which is the ancient holy one. Now, the ancient holy one is in a whole, it's the Partsuf of Keter. So all of Keter is the Partsuf of Atika Kadisha. But Atika Kadisha itself, the ancient holy one, is also separated into 2 Partsufim. There are 2 subsections of that Partsufim. The outer aspect of that Partsuf is called Arich Anpin, which is the long face, and this is the aspect which is connected to the Yud Gimel Midot Rachamim, the 13 principles of mercy, which is relevant in Yom Kippur and the Aseret Meid Shuvah. So that's Arich Anpin, which is the normal aspect that we see of Keter. But there is an inner aspect of Keter which is called Atik Yomin, the ancient of days. And this is this ancient of days is actually from within that for the Ari is the Malchut of Adam Kadmon. So the parts of the Sfirot, they begin from Atzilut. Atzilut is the first manifestation of the Sfirot, but actually the Sfirot exists prior to that, and that is within Adam Kadmon. Now Adam Kadmon, he has a Sfirot as well. This is the 5th universe. In the Ramak, Adam Kadmon is referred to as Olam HaTzachtzachot, the world of I don't even know how to translate Tzachtzachot. I don't even know how to translate it, like purity, perfection, stuff. So the Malchut of Adam Kadmon is what is referred to as Atik Yomin, which is the ancient of days. Now, not all of Atik Yomin. Some of Atik Yomin exists within Adam Kadmon, and some of it will exist. And these parts which exist within Adam Kadmon are the head of Atik Yomin, which is the first 3 Sfirot of Keter, Chochma and Bina of the Atik Yomin. That is called, collectively they're called the Radla, which is the Resha Loita, the unknown head, or unknowable head, which exists within Adam Kadmon. They're not part of Atzilut at all. And then the Sfirot of Chesed down to Malchut of Atik Yamin exist within the Sfira, the parts of Arich Anpin, and together they form Atika Kadisha. Now, for that, the Gra says that the Atik Yamin in this section has come to replace Malchut because it is Malchut, actually. It's the Malchut of Adam Kadmon. It's just not the Malchut. And like we saw in the previous section of the Sefer Yetzirah, so actually, the end of mid and the beginning is the beginning of the end. So actually, there is an aspect which makes sense here, that because Keter and Malchut are connected, in this sense, the Malchut of Atik Yamin is the Keter of Adam Kadmon is the Malchut. The Keter of Atzilut is the Malchut of Atik Yamin. This is the way that their end is embedded in their beginning. So that's what Atik Yamin is coming to replace it. Now we see Atik Yamin retains the aspect of the unity. It is one. It is the breath of the living God. It is Eses Rel Blima. It is still within this aspect of Blima, which is silent, ineffable. And then we have the beginnings of manifestation. We have Eser, we have Shtaim, we have Ruach Miruach, and here we have the beginning of speech, the beginning of language. And this is Keter for the Gra. So we have Atik Yamin, and then we have Keter here, or Arich Anpin. And this is where language begins. And so and the reason why is because he wants to. The reason why he does this, I believe, is because he wants to say that this ruach, this breath, is Keter. He wants to it makes this polarity. This not polarity. He wants to make this kind of this triad here. This three parts which function together and interact. So Keter, which is Keter, Chochma and Bina. So number 2, Ruach miruach, the breath from breath, is Keter. Right? And so for the Gra, this is Keter. And then going back to the way everybody else sees it as well, Shalosh, number 3 is water. Water is Chochma. And number 4 is Esh, and Esh is Bina. And then we have the 6 Sfirot from Chesed to Yesod. But what we have here, and what the Gra shows us, is that we have a system where we have Atikumin up here, which is the beginnings of all things, and then beneath it we have these three principles of Keter, Chochma, and Bina, and then a kind of from these 3 principles we have a reflection of them through, because these three principles corresponds to the Aleph, Mem, and the Shin. We'll see how, again, in the next section, we're going to start seeing this idea of fire, water, and air repeated over and over and over again. These are foundational principles of the Sefer Yetzirah. So and we'll see in the next section, or the next section after that even, how this is the third Mishnah, even the third chapter, sorry, of the Sefer Yetzirah. How water, air, and fire corresponds to the letters Aleph, Mem, and Shin. So how do they do that? So Aleph is Avir. So here it's Ruach in the actual the Sefer Yetzirah beneath in the third chapter. We have there. So we have Avir, Mayim, Ve'esh. See this? So Aleph, Mem, Shin, Ba'olam, Avir, Mayim, Ve'esh. So it's not Ruach, it's Avir, which means the air. Or really, Avir is space, an atmosphere, or sky, even. So we have. So that's how. But again, it corresponds to Ruach, Mayim, and Esh. It's the same principles that we're following here. So Aleph is Avir, Mem is Mayim, and Shin is Esh. They couldn't put another Aleph because Esh and Avir are the same. But they put a Shin instead. They put the second letter of Esh. So this is fire, water, and air. Or air, sorry, wind, breath, air, water, and fire, which is the same principle. So from here we have a reflection of it, of those 3 things, as the letters Yud, He, and Vav. And so Yud, He, and Vav also correspond to wind, to Ruach, Mayim, and Esh. So the Vav is Ruach, and the Yud and the He, we know that Yud corresponds to Chochma, He corresponds to Bina, and this is going into the Ari and also the early Kabbalah. The letters of Yud, He, Vav, He correspond to, so Yud is Chochma, the first He is Bina, the Vav is Zer Anpin, the 6th Sfirot from Chesed to Malchut, and the final He is Malchut. To Yesod, and the final He is Malchut. But here, we see that the Vav corresponds to, the Vav here corresponds to Zer Anpin, because that's why, I guess that's possibly why he uses the Vav as a means of directing things. But the Vav here comes from Keser. So that's what we have in the Ari, and the Idrot, in Idrot and Idrot Rabbah. Keter is Arich Anpin, or the characters, the main characters of the Idrot are Arich Anpin and Zer Anpin. Arich Anpin is Keter, and it's reflected in Zer Anpin. So actually, Chochma and Bina, which is Abba and Ima, the mother and the father, they are channels to manifest, to established Zer Anpin. And actually, Zer Anpin is where the full expression of Kudsha Bricha, of the Blessed Holy One, manifests as the letters of Yud, He, Vav, He. So this Yud, He, and Vav correspond to the Aleph, Mem, and Shin, which is the water, fire, breath, breath from breath, water from breath, and fire from water. And so again, what we have is Keter, Chochma, and Bina are manifested and reflected through these different directions, the different ways that Keter and Bina and Chochma interact, different combinations of these things, which are 6, corresponds to the different directions. So above would be Chochma. Again, if it's Yud, He, and Vav, above therefore is Chochma, Bina, Keter. Beneath is Bina, Chochma, Keter. East, like the forward direction is Keter, Chochma, Bina. So that's normal. That's again. So that's you wonder why is Yud Hey Vav above and not in Mizrach. Mizrach should be the most important one. But that's why it's Vav Hey Yud, because Vav is Keter, so it's Keter Chochma Bina, which is a normal way of looking at it. So if you look forward, it's Keter Chochma Bina. So again, so that's this whole play of this section here is about the interaction between Keter Chochma Bina, or the functionality of these three things, and so these three, especially in how we see how it manifests as the Vabar manifests as the feelings, as the spirit of emotions and the midot, correspond and fit nicely with how we've seen the prophetic requirements for the Rambam and the Abalafia, which is intellect, sechel, dimyon, and hergesh. Or the Tikkun Hamidot in the Rambam. So again, he hasn't mentioned it anywhere, but it seems like it fits, especially if you look at Sechel and Dimyon, the intellect and the imagination, that it fits quite neatly with Chochma and Bina. So even though for the Rambam Sechel is above, now we can look at kind of ramifications for it, and how, again, within Chassidut, certain elements of Chassidut, Bina is more important than Chochma. We can look at it in different ways. But again, it's an emphasis of what is missing. So in the times of the Rambam, Sechel was missing, the intellect, the ability to establish between truth and falsehood was missing. There was an intermingling of too much of an intermingling of things, dimyon, things which are like that, and there was too much of an afisat machshava, the nullification of thinking in that period, and so therefore the Rambam emphasized Sechel. Now in our generation, we have an overemphasis of Sechel. In the word sechel was used for the Jewish Enlightenment, haskala, which again, this is this primacy of this bina type of thinking, this sechel type of thinking, the movement away from imagination or in the humanities towards scientific thinking or to rationalistic thinking, which was something the Rambam promoted, but again, that wasn't a period when there was lacking, and now we have an opposite. And so we saw if you look in the Machshava Tova, the Piacenza Rebbe, he was writing beginning of the early 20th century. You'll see how he says that what we need to emphasize is dimyon to some extent. We need to emphasize the imagination. He connects it with the sechel and dimyon, the intellect and the imagination. So again, like we saw in the Rambam. So even though for him the sechel was primary, it's because the people in that period had already had an established imagination. Now we have in this generation, unfortunately, we have a lack of imagination, and we need to work on that side of things as well. So we need to do these two aspects of the perfection of the intellect: the ability to see clearly what's in front of us, and also the ability to work on our imagination. Now again, seems to be what I'm saying is that the imagination corresponds to Chochma, and I think it is. The Rambam says that Dimyon is one of its primary functions is the retention of sensory information, which is memory. Now we saw in the Sefer Yetzirah previously that memory, that Chochma corresponds to the past. So the past for us is nothing other than memory. There is no other concept of past, present, and future other than memory. Even though actually future is also part of the imagination as well. I mean, in reality, we're imagining what's coming next. But from the Sefer Yetzirah, Bina is part of the future. Is not there. It's part of something which we're encountering on a moment by moment basis. And that corresponds to Bina, the ability to distinguish, and that's why the important element of walking into the future is being able to distinguish between one thing and another. Whereas Chochma what we talk about wisdom is something which is acquired by the aged, by the elders of the generation. They have acquired wisdom. And the reason why is because they have a wealth of memories of how things function in the world. So the elders know which herbs are healthy, where do you pick these herbs for particular illnesses, and what this particular activity is good for, and how to, and in terms of craftsmanship as well. You'll learn from the elders how to do things. So the elders retain this knowledge, these memories of how certain things work. So that's why we say, again, it makes sense that Chokhmah and Dimyon are part of that same aspect, if the aspect of Dimyon is memory. So therefore, for me, it's quite clear that Chokhmah and Bina can be at least to some extent. Again, I don't want to go full board, because Dimyon is, this in the Rambam is seen as somewhat of a negative thing. Even though now I think Dimyon, imagination, is an important aspect of it. We have a lack of imagination, and we need to cultivate that. And imagination is part of progressing and moving forwards. Again, I don't know if the Rambam would fully agree that Dimyon is Chokhmah. You might argue with that, but I'm going to leave that section open. But in other areas, I think we can look at it as intellect and imagination, especially when we look at it from a wider perspective. So that's what I want to do in the course of looking at this particular section, is to look at intellect and imagination through the prism of Chokhmah and Bina, and how they can correspond to the meditation. Now, the final aspect, and this is what I want to really conclude with today, spend some time on it, is the idea of the Midot and Hergesh. Now, we saw how Hergesh corresponds to Keter, the way that the Aleph, which is Avir, which is Ruach, comes and manifests as the Vav of Zeranpin in these six Ketzavot. In the previous section, we spoke about how Keter is also the combination, or not the combination, it contains within it the aspects of Chokhmah and Bina. And so Chokhmah and Bina can be looked at as when they are bound together in a unity, inseparable unity, then that they can emerge as something greater, a Da'at Elyon, something, a greater knowing, a higher knowing, which contains both the past and the future, contains both intellect and imagination. So if you look at this is for me, again, if you want a point of reference, go look at Rav Morgenstern. Rav Morgenstern, for me, he talks about this a lot. A central theme in him. Have a look at Jerry Rosenfeld's commentary, his series on Entering the Sea of Wisdom. It's podcast available on most podcast platforms. It's a recurring theme there that he brings. Chokhmah is the aspect of unification, the aspect of, like we saw previously, as the Vashov aspect of the upper unity, of the upper waters, the whole idea of unification. So that's why Dimyon has this aspect of comparing everything together. So that within Dimyon, within imagination, everything is the same, because you can find points of similarity between anything. So everything has some kind of correspondence together. It becomes a whole. And Bina is about dividing things up. That's why language comes from Bina. And what was I talking about even now? So Bina is this divisive factor. So if you look at Rav Morgenstern, Bina is the differentiation. There's this aspect of duality. Now within Bina there is a duality. There is something which is not that thing. So there are two independent entities there which can exist. Now these two things contradict each other. Chokhmah, unity can't exist within duality, can't take duality. Duality cannot take absolute unity. These two things are reconciled within Keter, which contains both a duality and a non-duality. It contains both of these aspects. So it transcends both Apisat HaMachshava and the Ratzon and the running to duality. So we saw this previously, how we looked at this section of Mishnah number 6 here, Eses Rab Blima, when we looked at the Tzfiyat Tankamareh Bazak, when God said, when it says here, when His word is in them, in Ratzon V'Shov, in the Sfirot, His word is Bahen is the Sfirot, which is Olam HaAtzilut, which is Afisat HaMachshava. Who is speaking here? Whose word? So we see that the word corresponds to, like we saw in the graph, corresponds to Adam Kadmon. But Adam Kadmon is above Atzilut. So how can there exist speech above Atzilut? Because Adam Kadmon contains everything. In Keter, we have both speech and silence, which exist simultaneously, and they don't contradict each other. So in Atzilut, in Adam Kadmon, in Keter, speech and silence can coexist. Unity and duality can coexist then. So this is again a really important principle there, where there is simultaneously a speech and a silence there. But that is the aspect of Keter. So I'm in this way I'm looking at Keter not necessarily as the aspect of Midot or the aspect of Hergesh and the Abalafia, because I don't think that it's necessarily relevant. Even though it's corresponding here in the Sefer Yetzirah, there it doesn't really match up so clearly. But because Zeir Anpin is a reflection of Keter, and Zeir Anpin is the aspect of Midot and Hergesh. That is where feelings come in. That is where there is a deeper duality where there are 6 aspects which are part of one there, and forces which are drawing us into different areas. So this idea of Hergesh is important, and I'm just thinking now, actually, I think it might be best to leave this section to next time, and then we can spend a whole session, or at least an hour or so, on the idea of Hergesh. At least I've introduced this idea here now, that the Hergesh, the idea of Tikkun HaMidot, corresponds to Zeir Anpin, which is these 6 Kitzavot here. Intellect and imagination corresponds to Chochmah and Bina. And Keter is a transcendence and a unification of both Chochmah and Bina. And we're going to be spending a lot of time on these 3 aspects here, at least these 2 aspects as well, and then that Keter will manifest as a practice through these 2 things. But next week, let's spend more time looking at that. What we're going to do, B'ezras Hashem, we'll look at begin by looking at Yechezkel's vision. We'll remind ourselves what the Rambam talks about and what Ablafa talks about Hergeshim, and we'll come back here and we'll see the similarities with it. Okay, thank you. So B'ezras Hashem, we'll do that. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. And if you want me to stop the recording as well, I can stop the recording or pause the recording.
Yeah. How are you going to tie in the vision of Ezekiel with what we're studying next week when we start?
So B'ezras Hashem, we're going to look at one of the psukim where it talks about if you want a little introduction to it then. So Yechezkel's vision talks about fire, water, and air. So we'll see how fire, water, and wind manifest there, and also silence. And we'll see. And so that's kind of what I want to look at in that section, and then we can look at some of the commentaries on that. And this is within the Kabbalah, within the Ari, this is the klipot. So the Hergeshim corresponds with the klipot. And so I already mentioned that in terms of Chesed and Gevurah. So Chesed is love, loving kindness. Gevurah is strength, but Gevurah is also anger. So in a positive sense, it's fear of God, love and fear, love of God and fear of God. But in a negative sense, it's greed and anger. And that is the Sitra Achra. This is the spirit of Sitra Achra of the Klipot. And these are the things, again, the Tirdot of the Beit Yaakov speak about. Those are the things that prevent us from seeing. This is the Orla. which prevent us from seeing God, having the prophetic experience. Anyway, so B'ezras Hashem, we'll do that next week.
And what about the chanting? Is it possible to chant again at the beginning with the Surah box again?
So I would like to let me close the recording.